All right, welcome everyone to another edition of our subseasonal forecast contest, a special Friday edition here on April 17th. We've got special guests here, Dr. Lupo and Mr. Renken, who are going to be leading today's discussion. And just a reminder again, we submitted our forecast on Tuesday. So agenda is kind of our usual. We're going to start with attribution, look back, and then we'll get into the forecast. And again, we're going to give a lot of time to our special guest from Missouri to kind of go through their forecast process. And folks, just jump in here at any point in terms of the attribution. All right, so again, the most recent verification is the forecast from March 24th to April 8th through the 12th. And again, we're looking at gas-weighted HDDs. So that focuses on the major population areas of the country. When I sort this, you click on the CRPS, that's our primary skill metric. Click on it, you can sort it. So the best performer this period was Dave D'Arcangelo from Susquehanna. I don't think he's on the line right now, but Dave did quite well. In part, it was because, with the CRPS, it takes into account spread or / confidence. And Dave was pretty confident on this one. He had a very low spread of 11. And the fact that his forecast mean of 63.5 verified pretty close to the verification, which was 65.8, along with his spread being pretty narrow relative, to a lot of forecasts, gave him the pretty good, CRPS score. On the other side of things, we had the CFS, which this is not too much of a surprise. I don't know. I just don't understand it fully, but I won't get into a rant here. But the CFS obviously performed poorly. The CFS performed poorly because of it had a very high number of 85.5 HDDs. Verification was about 20 HDDs lower than that, so it was well without. And the normal, I should say, the normal was very the 30-year normal, which is sort of our benchmark, was also very close to the verification. So normal was very difficult to beat in this forecast. So anyway, CFS was by far the worst performer here. And then a lot of folks there in between. So it's always, with the CRPS, we've talked about this a little bit. We're always looking for, there's no perfect skill metric, right? The CRPS, in particular, when the normal is very close to the verification, it can be very unforgiving, right? Because the normal is, it's going to be very difficult to beat. The normal was, basically 1 HDD off from verification. So unless you had extraordinarily high confidence, then it's very difficult to get a high CRPS score. And Dave did about as good as you can do in this kind of situation, unless, again, you're going to forecast a spread of like 2 or 3 or 4, which arguably is beyond the limits of the science right now. So we can take a look also at the map here. So again, we have access to, this is April 8th to April 12th. I always like to look at the Dynacast tool. And again, for folks who haven't played with this tool, Maxar is very generous to give us access to this. It's a really weather geeky tool, so I highly recommend playing with it. You can just plug in dates and all this kind of jazz. That's what the verification map looked like. So again, it kind of netted out in terms of HDD space to very close to normal. You could see across the north, it was kind of below normal. Across the south, in terms of temperature space, it was below normal. In the south, it was kind of above normal. The west was kind of mixed. And if you click on the WDD tab, again, this is where you can look at it in terms of WDDs are basically the weighting degree days, and in this case, the heating degree days. You can see our verification is called target here, and you can see, again, it should line up with what we have in our forecast contest. So it was very, very close to the 30-year normal. And if you want, you could just see how it compared to all April 8th to April 12th periods in the last almost like 70 years here. I think it's since like 1950. So you can see it kind of ranked, in the middle. All right, and I also like to look at the 500 millbar pattern, right? That's always helpful to look at here. And then I'm gonna be quiet here in a second and open it up to everyone, but let's just take a look at North America. The global is a good one. Let's build the map.
You still have it on average temperature.
Oh yeah, thank you. Good catch. Although that's interesting too. But yeah, I meant to do 500 millibars. There's 500 millibars. So there's the pattern. For better or worse, we've got some ridging up in the Gulf of Alaska. I don't know if I'd call it a block, but definitely some ridging, which looks like, and then you've got that cold pool and trough, which tried to kind of sneak into the northern tier of the U.S. You've got this pseudo NAO. Again, I don't know if I'd call it a block. Certainly by the technical definition, I don't know. You probably have to be there for a certain number of days and whatnot, but definitely some ridging up across Greenland and eastern Canada that's stretched into Europe. So again, not what probably most folks would consider a canonical type block, because you would expect, troughing in Alaska if you had ridging in Greenland. So it was kind of a version of a NAO, negative NAO. And then another big feature, big kind of anomalous ridging feature out there across China and Eastern Asia in general. So let me stop there. Oh, let me just say, I think we may have a question, or Philip's trying to get in with the. I don't know if you noticed this. So I may just switch over if I see a message, because I guess because of some of the. I don't know if you can see on my screen, but I just let Philip in. I guess Zoom. I guess there were some problems with people Zoom bombing or whatever they called it, so they added some new security protections. But anyway, back to the weather. Yeah, let me just kind of stop there for a second. Anyone have any general thoughts? And we can look at the 30 and 90 day here too in a second, but particular to this forecast, anyone have any thoughts here in terms of the verification, surprises, lessons learned, any other highlights?
One of the things, Joe, one of the things that I noticed about the time of our spring break, or this was about the time that this forecast would have been issued, that the flow in the P&A region and also in the Atlantic started to get a little more amplified. And if you look at CPC's Hovmiller tool, where they keep track of, quote, blocking strength, you see that it was just before this forecast was issued that blocking started to pick up a bit, and we're seeing that. Some of these things may not meet the technical definition of blocking, because they might not be lasting 5 and 6 days, which is the definition. But you're definitely seeing a little more ridging and in both places, and that puts that usually traps us in a troughing in the central USA, and that was part of our process for this forecast.
Yeah, and another thing is timing of the cold fronts that were coming through that I was seeing on our other aspects regarding our analog options and the BSR, looking at that. And that's the thing, trying to time the cold fronts that were coming through and trying to associate it with the HDDs.
Yeah, that's a good point. So, and you can see on this, I don't have the Hovmiller, but you can definitely see what Dr. Lupo was referring to here. And I know, Michael, you've talked about this for a lot of the winter too. The NAO, this is the NAO index in black. And, for most of this winter, and to the surprise of many, myself included, the NAO has been so positive, but up until recently, right? And there's that dip that Dr. Lupo was mentioning. I forgot to show one other chart too. We oftentimes like to, Dr. Lupo was mentioning this forecast was made around spring break, March 24th, right? We can also look back what Maxar was forecasting. That's always instructive, and see what some of the thoughts were. Let's just do that real quick. I'm gonna pull it up, and again, everyone has access to this too. So again, this is the editor's notes, or I'm sorry, energy report, they call it, from March 24th. So this was the Maxar forecast from March 24th. this was unfortunately, we don't have the 500 millibar heights, but at least we have the EC temperature forecast, temperature anomaly, and then the CFS temperature anomaly. So that's right down here. And then we have the numbers, which you can also, of course, find in the forecast contest. But, you know, the CFS, you know, again, way too high there. And what we verify, again, around 63, I think. So Maxar had a pretty good forecast here. But the EC and CFS a little bit on the cold side there. I guess from a pattern perspective, kudos, I think, to Maxar, right? Because I think we did we did see some of the cool across the north, the warm across the south. EC did not capture the pattern well. Actually had, looks like warmth where we actually got some of the best cold, if I'm right. Is that right, guys? Sound right? Is that right?
Yeah, it wasn't, you know, it wasn't a screaming warmth. It had pockets, but yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, there's the, zoom back into the US. Yeah, yeah. So, okay, we can also take a look at the, actually, let me, for this could be for anyone, but in particular, Dr. Lupo and Mr. Renken, any thoughts as to why, any particular reason you think why the NAO finally chose this period to really break negative? As you know, I think there were some opportunities right across the during the course of the winter where it looked like there might be some more negative AO and negative NAO, but it just never really materialized. But obviously this time it did. Any particular reason why you think this instance was different than some of the others?
You know, with forecasting, it's always a little bit of a, not only a science, but a little bit of an art. And when you look at the what's been happening this winter, since about Thanksgiving, it seems like the flow has been just remarkably zonal, and the blocking in both the Pacific and Atlantic region has been very weak or almost non-existent. And you know, there wasn't anything that said to me, okay, now is the time, but it's the kind of thing where this can't go on much longer kind of thought process. And it looked like things were starting to pick up. So at that point we went with it, or I went with it. And so there wasn't anything that I can say, oh yeah, it was X that said to us this was going to happen. But just a little bit of a gut feeling based on statistics and climatologies and things like that, that it couldn't go much longer with the way things had been going.
Right. And to your point, here's the 90-day trailing, you know, 200 millibar height anomalies. And yeah, you can see that, I mean, geez, this, you know, just positive AO type regime across the globe. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just been remarkable this winter.
Okay. We can take a quick look at the longer term skill metrics before we get into the forecast contest. So I guess we can start with the 30-day just real quick. So this is looking at the last 4 or 5 forecasts. I just sorted it by performance here. So generally on the good side of normal for a lot of the forecast here. Again, we've got to figure out, we've got a little bit of a bug here with Dr. Lupo with the scores here. So there's 2. Looks like this one was the main one though. It's got 4 forecasts. This one only has 1.
Where's the other? Oh, I see.
Yeah,
there's 2 Anthony Lupos.
Right. This one only has 1 count, 1 forecast, and this one has 4. So that's good, right? That's good.
Yeah, I'm thinking that other one might be related to the email address I entered under. Joe, when you enter it, have you been entering it under your address or the
The MU SNR one, Doc.
Okay, because this one down here looks suspiciously like the last verification, and that's the
Yeah,
one
I think that's the one where you had to enter because I
that's
couldn't
the
get
one
to
I
it.
entered. So no wonder it's messed up.
Right. Okay. So we'll definitely get that fixed. But let's see. Looking at the bias real quick. Again, the CF. I mean, I guess the thing that jumps out to me in the last 4 or 5 weeks is the CFS, but I feel like that's a broken record. A positive HDD bias, i.e., too cold, and not very good scores there.
Yeah.
I think heating seasons a nice. I like looking at the heating season metrics. So it gives you a little bit more data. You can see the counts here. We've got this goes back to October 1st is where we started counting. And let's sort by directional hit rate first. I was like looking at that one. You can see my score here. I'm a flip of a coin. That makes me feel really good.
No.
That's what I'm worth, a quarter.
Oh,
No,
no.
but it really shows you the challenges here. The CFS negative. So I mean, 34% of the time, it's on the right side of normal. And some of our best scores up here, Paul Roundy's up there, and Dr. Lupo, you've got a good score up here too. Zach, one of our student forecasters, also has a pretty good score in industry. But you kind of get a sense. What I like about this, you kind of get a sense as to where the benchmark is in terms of, beating climatology or beating normal. I'm kind of curious what these stats would look like in the 11 to 15 and 6 to 10. Presumably, they would go up significantly,
Right.
but it'd be interesting to look at. And by the way, the EC is another obviously really important benchmark here. This is the raw EC, and it's a little bit above 50-50 at 54% there. So if you want to sort by bias, there's the bias. And some of these forecasts, the counts are really low. The ones that really matter here, I think, are like with the CFS and things like that. Any comments, or before we switch over to the forecast, any comments on the performance metrics here? All right. Okay, let's see. And just a quick reminder, I think most of you folks have seen this now, but we did add some new performance charts, which could be instructive for some folks and interesting. I won't go through them now. I just want to make sure everyone's aware of them. There's a little bit of a write-up. There's one of the students who's been collaborating with the forecast contest, Luke Bell. There's a really nice write-up about it if you click on that link. And then he basically is broken down where effectively you can look at performance on these curves broken down by the last 5 years. So this is the current year up through about a month ago, and then you've got last year, year before that, and so on. And so you can look at it in terms of the HDD forecast versus the verification in black. So that's what these kind of things. So you could say this winter, in most cases, the biases have been too high, right? The forecast, the reds and the blues are the forecast, and the verifications have been much lower for a good chunk of the winter. So forecast too cold. And then down here we have the correlations. And again, the only thing that I'll bring up in terms of correlations is that the one thing that really strikes me is how bad this winter has been and why. If you look at this winter, look at these numbers, correlations, and look at some of these previous years, the numbers are almost always higher. So that tells me one of two things. Well, one of two things: either there's a bug here, which we need to identify, or two, there's something really interesting about this winter in terms of why the models did not capture this, resolve this, these forecasts well. I don't have an answer, obviously, but I think it'll be fascinating as I assume a lot of research folks kind of look back and try to understand what happened this winter. All right, let's switch to the forecast then, right? All right, so today, again, we published our forecast on the 14th. So these are a couple days old. let's just look at the range real quick here. We had a range of, hey, look who's the highest, the CFS, right? CFS at almost 42 HDDs. Paul Roundy down at 30 HDDs. And just as a benchmark, normal is about, the 30-year normal is about 40 HDDs. You'll notice too that certainly HDDs continue to come down each week. And just a reminder, like we're going to switch over to CDD soon. Historically, we do that on May 1st. The first forecast that's issued in May, we'll switch over to CDDs. So that's just a traditional transition point we use. It's kind of consistent with the market, I think. But these HDDs are getting lower just because winter's running out. So, all right. So who wants to? Well, what? Maybe Dr. Lupo, Mr. Renken, we can, if you guys are okay with, we can kind of have you guys kind of kick us off. And again, we'd love to hear as much as you'd like to talk about your process or whatever. That'd be awesome. But we'd just love to hear more about your forecast.
Yeah. So to start the process, Dr. Lupo and I are usually either talking on Messenger or through email to think about what we are, what direction we might go. And then on Thursday and Mondays, I run an analog spreadsheet where I take like I was saying that first time you had me on, I take the 6 to 10 day CPC analog best 10 and the 8 to 14 analog best 10 dates, and I extend them all the way into week 6. And what I do is then I plug them in, and before I would just do like a week 3, 4, week 5, 6. But now that we entered into this contest, I separate them each week. That's one thing that I do, that I look at. And then the BSR research that we are doing, I also take into account for that. I also look at every week, the Bureau of Meteorology in Australia, the Aussies have a MJO research one. I don't know if you remember me sending you that link, Dave. And they have their research forecast going all the way to, if I remember right, day 36. So I take that into account also because it's really good in the sense that it shows the probability of reaching a certain MJO pentad. And then they take the mean of all of them and show the mean where it goes. The daily SOI change, I also look at huge discrepancies, if you will, for the daily SOI, whether it be a 10-point jump or drop or over 1 day, or a 20-point jump or drop over 3 days. And finally, I do take a look at the Euro weeklies. And like, for instance, that one that you just showed, it might have had pockets of warmth here and there, but, when it looks pretty neutral, I kind of almost throw it out in a sense because it could go either way, and it goes with climatology. And then finally, the JMA has their own forecast going out to weeks 3 and 4. So what I do is they have it weeks 1, week 2, and then they have another option for week 3 and 4. And all of those links are located in our, there you go. Yep, the POM one, and then the DS JMA one also. And then I look at week 2, since weeks 3 and 4 aren't separated, and then I kind of figure out, okay, so if it's here in week 2, where do they think it's going after that, to separate.
Well, and Joe, I don't know if we have given the background on these SOI changes and these analogs that we build, but I'll just quickly give a background on that.
Yeah, go ahead, Doc.
Yeah, what we did a couple of years ago, and it's in a paper that we published, and it's on our website. we looked at the PNA index over the daily PNA index over the 50 or now 70-year period that it covers. And we did Fourier decomposition on that, and we've done a lot of autocorrelations, and you repeatedly find significant cycles, not only in the synoptic period, which you'd expect, but 7 to 10 days. And then there's prominent 17 to 21 day peaks in the cycle with the PNA. And you can even find longer term cycles. For example, in 15 and 16, 2015, 2016, we had identified a roughly, what was it, Joe, 75-day cycle where it was wet every 75
that was
days.
in the Fourier.
And
Yep.
of course, that's your MJO signal. But these things you can find with the, and that gave the background for us creating these analogs, because Joe found that the SOI also exhibits this kind of behavior in step with the PNA region, since the Pacific has such an influence on the PNA region.
Hey guys, are there any maps or anything that you're able to share associated with some of this research?
Yeah, Joe.
Yeah, I have
have you given access to your analogs?
No, what I did not. I have not given the Google Drive, because I keep our analogs on a personal Google Drive folder, gentlemen, and until we actually get into, even the peer review that Dr. Lupo's, the paper that he's talking about is that we presented at the Missouri Science Convention 2 years ago, was it, Doc?
Yeah, we presented it at the Missouri Academy. We've presented it in NWA, and I believe we've even done it at AMS a couple times.
Well, that was the BSR. That was the BSR. But
Right.
I do have BSR maps. Cranky Weather Guy on Twitter used to host them, and then once he didn't have that ability, I took it and created a website dedicated to that specifically. And I haven't put that link for the maps down on our link page, because I'm trying to keep it in-house for now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So once I can send you guys via email those links, but I'm trying to keep it in-house because of I've run into a situation where a specific company that contributed one forecast took it upon themselves to A, rename our research, and B, utilize our research and basically misrepresent it.
Right. No, I can understand that.
Yeah, we should work on making the SOI stuff, those analogs, though, available.
And that's why I offered, I would be happy to send them the link through an email, but it would be it would be very selective on who got it, because again, that same company is in the email chain, so I would refuse to allow them to see it.
We'll get this published. So
I did find the paper from 2017.
Yeah.
Advances in Meteorology. That's publicly available.
Okay, that's great. And I was going to say, like, even if just, like in another one of these calls, and in the future, if you guys are willing just to share a couple screenshots, just as you're kind of going through your forecast process, I think that would even be helpful. Just, like, here are the analogs for today, and it could be a screenshot. And this is how we spliced it together. We had these analogs that said there was going to be big ridging here. And then we had our other analogs that said this, and this is how we kind of put it together. Just in the spirit of, allowing folks to see how the sausage was made. But again, as much as you're willing to share, or, that could be helpful even in that kind of situation.
Yeah. And one of the things real quick is, I'm calling from work, and the government doesn't allow me to look at my links here at work. So.
Hey, Joe, if you show me how to do it, unfortunately, as is often the case, the younger of the team is more technologically savvy. And so if Joe can show me how to do it, and I can check in more often and show.
Hold on real quick. What I can do though is, I could, let me get the, there it is. Okay. I'm going to type it into the chat.
Oh, okay. That's good.
And then while Mr. Renken's doing that, another question for you guys, just in the general, since we have you talking about subseasonal here in a bigger way for the first time. Do you guys, in terms of some of these methods and such, and just in general subseasonal forecasting, have you found, and we could stick to the winter, just since we've been forecasting the winter, do you find that these tools and forecasts work better in certain situations where you can have more precise, better accuracy, versus maybe other situations where you can go into and say, oh, this is a low confidence, wide distribution type forecast?
Well,
you can go ahead and answer that, Don.
Yeah, we had taken some of this and taken the analogs that Joe created, and we broke them up into El Nino periods versus La Nina periods versus neutral periods like we're in right now. And again, yeah, some of these analogs will show different things for El Nino versus La Nina. And so we do pay attention to the interannual variability as it relates to some of this stuff too. So.
Okay, and do you find, I've heard different things about this, do you find that the signals, the subseasonal signals, are better, I guess ultimately forecast skill is better when you have a strong, climate signal such as ENSO, like if you're in a strong El Nino, strong La Nina, if you're in even subseasonal signals like strong MJO, phase 8, phase 6. Does that?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. The stronger the background signal is, and the more persistent it is, the better these things work.
So when you're in seasons with when ENSO is weak, when you're in subseasonal situations where the MJO is relatively weak, that ultimately overall, those are, as a general rule, that kind of like, those are situations where forecast skill is lower and the distributions need to be higher because you just don't have a signal.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely. When you get these weaker signals, it's a lot tougher.
Yeah, and when in the BSR research, we had the various hit rates too that shows in the paper, and we addressed that for that specific reason that and that we compared. In fact, that and we were shocked by the other aspect of the research is the East Asia rule, and it was a shorter term between 6 to 10 days compared to the BSR, which was 17 to 21. And we were shocked that the false alarm signal was actually higher with the East Asia rule than the BSR rule in that aspect.
Yeah, that was a stunner.
Actually, would you guys mind, because I think a lot of folks on the call probably aren't so familiar with that. Can you guys summarize, a couple of those? I think you like a rule, those pattern rules of thumb, and in terms of you've looked into, or pattern connections or teleconnections that you've looked into in the findings? Can you give kind of like a short summary?
Yeah, with the BSR, it's just saying that there's a strong correlation between what's going on in the Bering Sea region and what's going on in the central USA. It's actually kind of a part of the well, that's part of the P&A index, but the East Asia rule is similar, because you look at what's going on in East Asia, and there's a little bit of a correlation between troughing there and troughing in the central USA. Is that right, Joe? It was the troughing and ridging versus ridging?
Yeah, because we developed the East Asia's index based on Seoul, South Korea, and Nashville,
That's
Tennessee.
Right. It was
that was the index.
South Korea station versus middle USA.
And have you guys, and I know I'm kind of going all over the place, but I'm really interested, since you guys focus on this area, and we've had other folks come on with different theories and stuff like that. I know some groups talk about, what's your thoughts in terms of utilizing two things I'm going to throw out. Eurasian, well, three things I'll throw out. Three things I'm going to hit you with. Snow cover, like Eurasian snow cover, is using that as a predictor on subseasonal or seasonal timescales. Stratosphere, utilizing sudden stratospheric warmings and coolings as a tool in the subseasonal. And last, sunspots, a little bit more controversial, but there was a lot of talk earlier this winter in the industry that I've mostly been a part of over the last 15 years, the sort of energy commodities industry. There are definitely some groups that talk a lot about sunspots in terms of having a factor on the AO, NAO. On those, I know I hit you with a lot, those three topics, but I'd love your views on those.
Just off the top of my head, the snow cover, the Eurasian snow cover, is probably going to be more, or is probably going to be indicative, because that's going to correlate to seasonal jet stream patterns. So yeah, there's going to be some basis for that. I haven't looked at it myself. Sudden stratospheric warming relates quite often to the frequency and strength of blocking, which of course is near and dear to me. And so, yeah, sudden stratospheric warming can indicate more you're going to find that more, it seems, with the amplified AO. Sunspots, on the other hand, that seems to be, I would think that that's more of a longer term indicator, not so much of a seasonal, but I'd have to see what people are looking at with that.
Okay, thank you. And that research I know is more controversial. And one thing you'll see in the commodities energy industry is it's not always, folks are not always utilizing the best research practices. It's not always certainly peer reviewed and things like that. Sometimes it's more speculative and subjective and stuff like that. So, all right, but that's great. Let's see.
Yeah, because as you were, at the beginning of the winter, Dave, I saw a lot of people just going all in with their chips for that solar minimum.
Yes.
And, it really bit them, if I hate to say it like that, because, they basically based all of their winter forecasts solely on the fact that because of the low sunspots, it was guaranteeing a negative NAO and a positive P&A. And they weren't looking at anything else, and it's like you got to be careful, because I always say, it's a marriage of sorts, and if you got to take literally everything into account, and just like what we're doing here, on a subseasonal basis, you literally have to look at everything and find out, okay, well, what's the noise versus what's going to be legitimate.
I think that's a super great point. I really do. I could not agree more. I think there's a tendency, I think it's human nature to abhor uncertainty.
Right.
And we don't like things that we don't fully understand. And so I think as meteorologists, and myself included, we try to latch on to things. So if there's an El Nino, if there's a low sunspot cycle, and there's a relationship there, we overweight them. We tend to overweight these things. We try to give them more credence than they deserve because it simplifies things, right? It's more simple to say, hey, sunspot cycle, low solar minimum, negative AO. But to your point, the environment, the atmosphere, it just doesn't usually work that way, right? It's complex. It's getting more complex with climate change, and there's usually just not one thing that's going to dictate things. It's just so but I think we get into trouble a lot, and I think that's a great point.
Oh, absolutely. Because I mean, with the sunspots, for example, it just seems like you're mixing time scales. We're looking at seasonal 6-month kind of things, and sunspots I thought were more 11-year and 12-year.
Right. Yeah. It's a good point. So, all right. So, I mean, I'm looking at the clock here. We've got about 13 minutes. This might be a good time to see. I know a couple other folks joined the line here. Professor Decker, or I think Philip might be on the line. Would you guys like to give us your thoughts on the current forecast?
Yeah, I can mention my forecast. As always, I'm just turning the CPC 3-4-week forecast into a number. We still have that north-south oriented temperature gradient in the forecast. It's just shifted much further to the north. So most of the cold side is now, aside from, say, parts of upstate New York and Boston, it's mostly, low population areas. So given both the geographical and population weighted extent of the above normal conditions, I did go slightly above normal for my forecast, up above normal temperature, so below normal with the HDDs. However, I didn't go too crazy because a lot of that warmth, I'm thinking, aren't really contributing to HDDs at this point, into May anyway. But you do see my numbers there slightly below the 30-year normal, and only a slight increase in my spread. I've been increasing my spread lately because of, if that bear clinic zone shifts a little further north or south, that could have a big impact. But it's so far north now that I'm reducing that as a source of uncertainty.
Stephen, I have to agree with you on that. That was kind of some of our thinking as well. And one of the hardest things to learn in this game is translating a meteorological forecast to an HDD forecast. And when you look at that, the cooling is in places where there isn't a huge population. So, and that kind of drove our forecast as well.
Right, and Professor Decker has mentioned several times, it seems like over the past few weeks, just because we've seen this actually the past couple months, this gradient, which I think is so important. When you see it's really been accentuated in some of the recent forecasts too, but where you see that tight gradient of cold and warm near the major cities, that I think that could be, I think Professor Decker, you've said this, a real good indicator of low confidence too, right? Because, if you've got a strong temperature gradient along the I-80 corridor near Chicago and New York, it could take even just a normal type synoptic error, like the 500 millibar height pattern, verifies a little bit to the north, a little bit to the south, something that's not out of the ordinary, something that's well within normal, expectations in terms of what you expect, could cause massive changes in HDDs. And I think that's one of the challenges with this forecast, to think about it that way. It's not always, we don't always think about it that way, but it's not just thinking about the jet stream, because again, in that situation, the jet stream the errors within the jet stream could actually be below normal. It could be you have a very good jet stream forecast, but if that temperature gradient is across key areas that produce HDDs. Just south of Chicago, just north of Chicago, that can mean the difference between your HDD forecast busting or doing well. And, we want our folks to think that way because that's how industry, these are problems that industry has to tackle, right? And so we don't want to avoid these things. We want to take them head on and try to figure out the best ways to handle it. And one of them could be adjusting your spread, right, and things like that. So, speaking of, I couldn't help but notice this morning when I was looking at this. I don't think we have anyone in Chicago this morning, but geez,
Yeah.
and look at that. That blue. This is what time of year is this? Oh my goodness.
Well, I kind of joke on Facebook along those lines. My grandfather always told me never plant your tomatoes until after Mother's Day because of the risk of frost going into the first part of May.
Amen. No, I totally agree. Tomatoes, that's a tropical plant. I plant them too. And it's so tempting in April when you get some of that warm weather to say, I'm going to get them in early. But you get them in early and then this happens and forget it. You're replanting. All right. Let's see. Is anyone else on, or Michael or Philip would like to go through their forecast here?
Yeah, I can go.
Sure.
All right, so my forecast was for 39.5 HDDs, normal spread of 11.6. Formula, which I'll go through real quick, since I go 60% teleconnections, mainly looking at the NAO, PNA, the AO, and the EPO, and then I use 30% of the CPC forecast and 10% of 30 years, kind of like a baseline. So this time it looked back on 14th doesn't look as good as it did now, but negative NAO and the AO was also forecast to be going towards negative. With a positive PNA, I figured that there'd be a little bit colder in the Northeast, kind of similar to the pattern we just had or are having right now, I should say. A little bit of warmth on the West Coast. The CPC also was looking quite warm, as Dr. Decker also mentioned, and I also discounted a lot of that warmth because those are not really HDD producing areas, especially on May 1st. I don't think, kind of just drew a line through the country and was like, okay, anything south of that line is probably not producing HDDs at this point. So I went rather cold. 39.5 is the coldest human forecast. So hopefully it works. But any questions?
No, I think that was pretty clear. Thank you, Michael. On my end, anyway. I was thinking about something you were saying with the teleconnections. This is something we always talk about every week too, with in particular with Michael. It's like, how do you bake in the teleconnections with the models, right? Because they're interconnected, right? But in some cases, you might suspect that the models are biased in a certain way, so you kind of use the teleconnections to hedge in a certain direction. If they're underestimating the NAO, underestimating the PNA, things like that. That's, I think, we have, in fact, we have one of the students associated with this, Erin at Albany. I don't think she's on the line, but she's looking into, in part because of this winter, and in part because of what we were talking about earlier, how just go to this graph. You look at some of the, the day 14, some of these AO with this bias, right, where the black line is the verification, the blue line is the forecast mean, and how we saw this bias. She's looking into the long-term AO forecast performance from the models, and to see if there is more of a systematic errors and things that we can better understand in terms of the why. Like, again, why is this? Like, is it something about the background state, something about the subseasonal state, something about, is it just, you know, is it noise? Is it beyond the limits of our science? I don't know, but that we're looking into that a little bit, and we'll see if we find anything that's, hopefully we'll have something that's worth sharing with the group. All right, let's see. Does we only have a few minutes left. Does anyone else have anything that they want to touch on before we close this out?
So I didn't get a chance to make a forecast on Tuesday. Hello. Yeah, so I didn't get a chance to make a forecast on Tuesday, but taking a really quick look at the MJO, also the ENSO, and then taking a look at our 10-year normal and our 30-year moving average, I would say that my forecast would probably end up, and then also since I use some of the same teleconnections that Mike uses, it doesn't look like there's a very strong signal from the MJO moving into phase 2, 3, possibly null phase, but I haven't investigated that in detail to see if there's competing signals or if that's actually just the phase being a weak signal. But putting everything together, I would say my forecast would probably be somewhere near where a lot of those moving averages are. So probably if I were to just come up with a number off on the top of my head, I would say 37 or 38.
Got it. And Philip's done quite well in the forecast contest. He's got, I think we alluded to this earlier, that he's near the top, in particular in terms of the students. So I always listen to what Philip has to say. It's my subseasonal whisper. All right. Let's see. Well, I don't want to keep anyone longer than an hour, since you guys have already given a lot of time. Definitely want to thank Mr. Renken, Dr. Lupo. This is really cool. This is really great having you guys and giving you guys more of an opportunity to kind of go through your process. Definitely, I hope we can absolutely do this again. Love to hear a little bit more about your analog process and things like that. It's been really great having you guys and getting your expertise and different methods for making this forecast. I think it's helpful for all of us. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. Glad to be with you all today. And certainly as the semester winds down, I can join these a little more.
Yeah, that'd be great. And our schedule, one thing we're trying to do a lot more now is be flexible. So at the very least, alternate between Tuesdays and Fridays. Trying to accommodate more folks and things like that. So yeah, that'd be great. All right. Well, thanks everyone. Have a great weekend. And just a reminder, next week, again, next week we'll resume the Tuesday forecast discussion. So we'll submit our forecast and also have the forecast discussion on Tuesday next week. All right, guys. Take care. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks. Have a good day.
Thank you.